A prison is only as strong as the person who rules inside it. There are names that, when spoken, can silence an entire cell block. They don't need to step outside to order a killing. They don't need to hold a blade to spread fear. They control drugs, gangs, and lives from within a place called maximum security. This is the record of 10 leaders who made America realize sometimes prison doesn't contain power. It cultivates it. Number 10. Tavon Bulldog White, Black Guerrilla Family. According to federal records, Tavon Bulldog White ruled the Baltimore City Detention Center like a shadow warden. He wore no badge, yet his power reached far beyond the steel bars. When investigators wiretapped his phone in 2013, they heard him say, "This is my jail. I make every final call. I am the law." That sentence became a symbol of how law and order collapsed inside one of Maryland's largest prisons. Court documents show that White led the Black Guerrilla Family faction within BCDC. From a damp cell, he built a system of coercion and total control. Correctional officers smuggled in Suboxone, painkillers, and illegal phones. Inmates were forced to pay protection taxes if they wanted peace. Those who owed money were greenlighted, a code for punishment that could mean a beating, a stabbing, or a sudden cell transfer. Transactions were handled through green dot money pack codes, a legal payment system outside the walls, but inside, it became the currency of violence. The phone in Bulldog's hand was the command center of his empire, tracking who received contraband, who was in debt, and who was to be handled. Every call was an order. Investigators later said he controlled violence by phone. Recordings played in court revealed that White never shouted. He gave quiet commands, and violence followed without hesitation. The federal investigation exposed deep corruption throughout the facility. 13 correctional employees were indicted. 4 of them became pregnant by inmates, including Jennifer Owens, who admitted smuggling drugs and had 2 children with White. Prosecutors stated, this was no longer a correctional center, this was Tavon White's business operation. BCDC, meant to confine offenders, had turned into a shadow economy, where inmates were served and the guards became couriers. On August 6, 2013, Tavon White pleaded guilty to racketeering conspiracy and agreed to cooperate with investigators. 2 years later, Judge Ellen Hollander sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison, plus 20 years in state custody for a prior attempted homicide. During the hearing, someone argued that violence actually dropped when Bulldog was in charge. But prosecutors called it a paradox, that peace only existed because everyone feared him. Just 1 month before sentencing, Governor Larry Hogan ordered the closure of BCDC, calling it a stain on the correctional system that could not be fixed. In 2019, the complex was demolished, as if the state itself wanted to erase the symbol of a place once ruled by inmates. Tavon White was not a kingpin or a legend. He was the product of a broken system, one where money, drugs, and fear outweighed the rule of law. When the steel doors finally closed, what lingered was not power, but a warning. In prisons like Baltimore once had, the law never disappeared. It was simply spoken in another man's voice. Number 9. Tyler the Hulk Bingham, Aryan Brotherhood. In 1997, inside a high-security cell at ADX Florence, Tyler the Hulk Bingham wrote a letter that looked ordinary. A blank sheet of paper with no visible words. But when held over heat, a message appeared: War with DC Blacks, TD. According to court records, that letter was believed to have left ADX and reached another Aryan Brotherhood member at the Lewisburg Penitentiary. The next day, 2 black inmates were found deceased. Prosecutors described it as the order that sparked a prison race war. Bingham was no newcomer. He was one of 3 men prosecutors identified as the Commission, the top ruling council of the Aryan Brotherhood, one of the most violent white supremacist gangs in the federal prison system. According to the indictment, Bingham coordinated assaults, approved internal discipline, and sanctioned every act written in blood. At ADX Florence, no one could make a call, no one could meet face-to-face, yet orders still traveled. Federal investigators found that Bingham used coded letters written with lemon juice or urine, invisible until exposed to heat. Sometimes he hid messages in the spine of library books, or sent them through air ducts connecting isolation cells. It was, as one agent described, a primitive internet made of steel and concrete. In 2006, in Santa Ana, California, Bingham was tried alongside Barry the Baron Mills and 2 other leaders. The trial lasted 5 months with hundreds of pieces of evidence, member lists, coded letters, and hidden notes. In July that year, the jury returned guilty verdicts for racketeering and murder. By September, they were deadlocked on the death penalty, and the court converted the sentences to life in prison. Early the next year, Bingham received 3 life sentences without parole. During sentencing, the judge stated, "He didn't need a knife to take a life. He had a pen." That remark perfectly described Bingham's power, quiet, unseen, carried out through others, while consequences fell on those who never met him. Court documents indicated that Bingham and Mills ran the Aryan Brotherhood as a criminal enterprise. Every violent order required approval from the Commission. Anyone breaking the code was greenlighted, a command for elimination. The gang's structure mirrored a military chain, from commission to counselors, then soldiers and associates. In that world, loyalty was currency, and suspicion was a death sentence. After the trial, the FBI warned that similar invisible ink letters continued to appear in other facilities, showing that the coded chain of command was being copied. But prosecutors said Bingham's influence ended at Florence, where the law finally silenced the pen that had once started a war on a blank page. Tyler Bingham carried no glory, and his legend faded long ago. He became proof of a time when one man could command death with an inkless letter, forcing America's prison system to confront what true power can look like behind bars. Number 8. Barry the Baron Mills, Aryan Brotherhood. In 2006, at the federal courthouse in Santa Ana, 4 men stood trial in what prosecutors called the dissection of a violent empire built behind bars. Sitting at the center of the defense table was Barry the Baron Mills, a cold-faced man with a piercing stare whose letters alone had once forced dozens of federal prisons into lockdown. According to court records, Mills was one of the top leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood, the most violent white supremacist gang in the U.S. prison system. Alongside Tyler the Hulk Bingham, he formed the Commission, the Supreme Council that directed thousands of members nationwide. They didn't need meetings. Orders were written in invisible ink, passed from inmate to inmate or hidden inside the spines of library books. A single word, greenlight, could mean death. Prosecutors said Mills wasn't just transmitting orders, he was approving them, deciding who would live and who would not. His name appeared in connection with a series of killings that spanned decades, from a 1979 stabbing at USP Atlanta to 2 homicides at Lewisburg in 1997, attacks that prosecutors described as the beginning of a race war inside the prisons. When the RICO case was filed in 2002, the government portrayed the Aryan Brotherhood as a criminal enterprise within the correctional system, and Mills as the man holding the key to every violent decision. The trial lasted 5 months, with hundreds of pieces of evidence, coded letters, membership lists, and ledgers tracking drug profits. Witnesses described murder orders written on toilet paper, rolled tightly, and hidden inside air vents. Those scraps of paper were enough to ensure some men never made it back to their cells. In July 2006, the jury convicted Mills of racketeering and murder in aid of racketeering. By September, the jury was deadlocked on the death penalty, and the judge sentenced him to 4 consecutive life terms without parole. During sentencing, prosecutors said, he managed violence the way others manage a business. Mills was later transferred to ADX Florence, the highest security prison in the United States. He died there in 2018 at the age of 70. No ceremony, no statement, only a brief note in the prison's record, deceased, natural causes. But his influence didn't die with him. The structure he helped create, commission, council, soldiers, still exists in various prisons. The word greenlight continues to circulate, whispered through vents and corridors, and the walls still seem to tremble whenever rumors of a new hit spread. Barry Mills never needed to leave his isolation cell to control the world around him. All he needed was silence, because in a system where fear is the common language, silence itself becomes power. Number 7. Pedro Magu, or Light Gutierrez, United Blood Nation. In a Charlotte courtroom in 2018, 3 men sat quietly behind the defense table, wearing white shirts and calm expressions. According to prosecutors, they weren't just defendants, they were the executives of violence, the CEOs of the Bloods, holding life and death power over thousands of members across the east coast of the United States. At the top sat Pedro Magu Gutierrez, also known as Light or Inferno, the chairman of the United Blood Nation and the godfather of its 9 Trey Gangsters faction. Court records show that Gutierrez managed operations from inside a New York prison using 15-minute phone calls, coded letters, and a 31-rule constitution he personally approved. Beneath him was a council of highs, generals, and set reps, functioning like an underground government. Each month, every member was required to pay dues, collected upward through the hierarchy and consolidated for the chairman. Anyone who paid late was warned. Anyone who betrayed the code was placed on the menu, a death list. In the Blood's internal language, to be marked as food meant to be a target. On the worldwide menu meant an active execution order. According to the Department of Justice, when a name appeared on that list, Bloods factions from New York to the Carolinas would automatically track the target. No meeting was required. No weapon in Gutierrez's hand, just one coded message. That structure turned the United Blood Nation into a multi-state criminal organization, directing violence from behind bars as if prison were simply an office. In 2017, the DEA and FBI launched Operation Bloodline, arresting more than 80 members and seizing phones, notebooks, and menus, listing potential victims. One agent said even in isolation he could send a green light order through intermediaries. It worked like a power grid of violence. When Gutierrez went to trial alongside James Frank White Baxton and Cynthia Lady Bint Gilmore, prosecutors presented hundreds of text messages, recordings, and translated codes. The jury convicted them of racketeering, conspiracy, and violent crimes in aid of racketeering. In September 2018, Gutierrez was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison to run consecutively with his existing state sentence. The court described him as the heartbeat of the United Blood Nation, a man who turned prison rules into a shadow constitution. According to a 2020 appellate record, Gutierrez was still referred to as the governing body of all Bloods on the East Coast. The system he built left a lasting mark. Neighborhoods once ruled by 9 Trey still bear red 31 tags on their walls, silent reminders that violence can be managed through a single phone call or a handwritten note. Pedro "Magu" Gutierrez won't be released anytime soon, but the power he once held, the structure, the dues, and the death lists, remains a stark example of how a criminal organization can turn a prison into its headquarters. He didn't need a weapon. All he needed was a network built on trust and fear. That is why the name Magu still lingers today, as a symbol of the hidden authority that once made America question what it really means to control a prison. Number 6. Larry Hoover, Gangster Disciples. When the White House announced the federal sentence reduction for Larry Hoover in May 2025, many in Chicago mistakenly believed the boss of the Gangster Disciples was about to walk free. The truth was far from that. Hoover remained behind bars, serving a state sentence of 150 to 200 years for the 1973 killing of William Pookie Young. While the federal doors opened slightly, Illinois State Prison remained locked, because his name had once represented an empire of violence structured like a corporation. According to court records, Hoover was not only the founder, but also the chairman of the board, a title borrowed from corporate culture. Yet each board meeting of the Gangster Disciples decided who would live, who would die, and who was allowed to run drug operations across dozens of neighborhoods. His network was organized into levels: board of directors, governors, regents, coordinators, and soldiers. Each member had to pay 1 day's profit per week, known as the Day of Dues, in exchange for protection from assaults or losing their territory. Witnesses testified that anyone who refused to pay was greenlighted, an execution order without a court. In 1995, Operation Headache struck the entire hierarchy. The FBI arrested 39 high-ranking members, seizing ledgers showing profits, dues, and handwritten letters signed by Hoover. 2 years later in federal court, prosecutors played recordings of Hoover giving orders from prison, discussing operations on 47th Street, checking soldiers, and ensuring the money kept flowing. One investigator said he ran organized crime the way a CEO runs a franchise. The 1997 to 1998 trial ended with 40 convictions, including extortion, conspiracy, and money laundering. The federal court described the Gangster Disciples as a large-scale violent criminal organization, with Hoover maintaining control through fear, money, and blood. Those convictions led to Hoover's transfer to ADX Florence, the nation's most secure prison. Even in isolation, records show he attempted to rebrand his movement as Growth and Development, a name that sounded reformative, but federal authorities saw it as a cover to maintain his influence. When his federal term was reduced in 2025, public reaction was split. Some saw it as an act of compassion. Others called it a mistake, because the system Hoover built still casts a shadow today. From South Side to Englewood, neighborhoods remain shaped by the rules he wrote half a century ago. Pay dues, stay silent, obey orders. Larry Hoover is more than a notorious inmate. He is a reminder of how violence can take the form of structure, paperwork, and hierarchy. A man can spend 24 hours locked inside a concrete cell and still hold power far beyond its walls. A sentence reduction cannot erase that history. It only forces America to face an old question. When prisons hold men like Hoover, who is truly confined, them or the world outside? Number 5. David D.C. Cervantes, Nuestra Familia. In the world of Nuestra Familia, the most dangerous man isn't the one holding a knife. It's the one holding a pen. From deep inside the isolation unit at Pelican Bay, David D.C. Cervantes was once known as the General. According to the Department of Justice, he was one of the 3 highest-ranking leaders of Nuestra Familia and the sole member of its General Advocate's Office, an internal tribunal with the authority to decide who would be disciplined, attacked, or marked for death. Outsiders called it a shadow court, but inside Nuestra Familia it functioned as a parallel justice system, where a single signature could determine whether someone lived or died. Each time a complaint, an internal accusation, was filed from one of the street regiments, it passed through D.C. He ordered an investigation, reviewed the findings, then personally wrote his recommendation: to keep, to punish, or to greenlight. All of it was sent to the General Council, the 7-person governing body of Nuestra Familia, for a final decision. No weapons, no meetings, just a sheet of paper traveling through the prison mail system, powerful enough to make someone vanish on the streets of the Bay Area. In 2024, after more than 5 years of investigation, Cervantes was convicted of RYCO conspiracy in federal court in Northern California. Prosecutors said he authorized at least 3 assassination plots and 2 attempted murders between 2015 and 2019, all coordinated through coded letters and recorded phone calls. Wiretaps revealed that he continued to direct removals from behind bars, using regimental commanders as intermediaries to manage different territories like provinces in the Nuestra Familia Empire. When the FBI raided his network, agents found internal memos, territorial maps, debt lists, and disciplinary reports. One document, bearing the initials DC, ended with the words, "Approved for removal." In Nuestra Familia's language, removal doesn't mean transfer. It means permanent elimination. In June 2025, Judge Tavon Gonzalez-Rogers sentenced Cervantes to 10 years in federal prison. During sentencing, she said, "You held the equivalent of a prosecutor's power in a system without law. Your decisions caused others to die." The Department of Justice called it the final chapter in the long campaign against Nuestra Familia. 40 members and associates convicted, and dozens of killings officially tied to the organization. From Pelican Bay to federal facilities across the country, the system that D.C. built lasted for decades. A bureaucracy of violence, complete with reports, reviews, and final approvals. Observers said he ran a criminal syndicate, like a government agency. But behind the paperwork and structure lay something colder. A man who signed off on death as if approving a document. David D.C. Cervantes didn't rely on violence to create fear. He controlled an empire through procedures, signatures, and the unspoken terror of punishment. That is why his name still echoes among those who once served under him. Because in the world of Nuestra Familia, the most dangerous killer isn't the man who strikes, but the one who knows when to sign. Number 4. Luis Felipe King Blood, Latin Kings. In American criminal history, few figures have founded and led a gang while remaining behind bars. Luis Felipe, known as King Blood, did exactly that, from a small prison cell in New York. According to court records, he founded the Almighty Latin King and Queen Nation, Bloodline, in 1986 while serving time at Collins Correctional Facility. From an unknown inmate, Felipe built an underground hierarchy, with ranks, laws, punishments, and even death sentences. Within the organization, members called him the Inca, the supreme leader. His orders moved through handwritten notes or coded messages smuggled out on tiny rolled papers hidden inside food trays or laundry. Federal prosecutors later called it a criminal corporation operating from inside prison. Within a few years, tribes, local Latin King chapters, spread across the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens. And whenever a member betrayed the crown, an order would leave Felipe's cell. Terminate on sight. According to his 1997 court file, more than 60 letters were seized from his cell, containing directives for killings, discipline, and financial collections. One letter, written in Spanish and translated to English, read, "You dishonored the crown. Remove him." Days later, the man named in the letter was found fatally attacked on the street. During sentencing, Judge John S. Martin stated, Felipe ordered at least 6 killings from inside his prison cell. The trial resulted in 18 convictions, including RYCO and conspiracy to commit murder. Felipe received a life sentence, plus one of the rarest restrictions in federal history: a total ban on any communication with Latin Kings members. No letters, no phone calls, no visits except from his attorney. The order was meant to prevent him from running the gang from behind bars. A later appeals court upheld that decision, calling Felipe a continuing threat even in isolation. Investigators said Felipe oversaw a strict internal system with ranks: Inca, Council, Generals, and Tribes. When a member broke the code, a hearing was held. The punishment was marked with shorthand: BOS, beat on sight, or TOS, terminate on sight. From his cell, Felipe approved each decision like an administrator signing paperwork, except every word he wrote could cost a life. Criminologists later described the Latin Kings under Felipe as the most structured street organization in America. But to law enforcement, it was a nightmare. A man in solitary confinement commanding a multi-state gang with nothing but paper and pencil. When his 1997 sentence was handed down, prosecutors called it a ruling for the man who could kill by letter. More than 2 decades later, Felipe remains in isolation. No contact, no correspondence, no voice beyond the concrete walls. The Latin Kings continue to exist, but King Blood has vanished into silence. All that remains is a chilling legacy. A man who proved that violence doesn't need a gun, only orders and blind loyalty. Number 3. Jose Fox Landa Rodriguez, Mexican Mafia. Inside the Los Angeles jail system, power didn't belong to the guards. It belonged to men like Jose Fox Landa Rodriguez, the man who ran the Mexican Mafia from behind bars. According to the Department of Justice, Fox wasn't just an inmate. He was the architect of a vast economy of drugs, money, and fear that dominated California's prisons for years. During his time inside Los Angeles County Jail, every gram of narcotics smuggled in was taxed. 1/3 of the profit, known as the Dirty Thirds, went straight to the Mexican Mafia as a survival fee. Anyone who disobeyed or sold without permission was greenlighted, a death order needing no court, just a nod from Fox. Investigators said the jail had become a government of its own, and he was the one running it. From solitary confinement to seas, Fox managed the tax system through dozens of intermediaries called shot callers, representatives in every housing unit. They collected money from Latino inmates, pooled it into the Kitty Fund, and sent it up the chain. Each week, thousands of dollars circulated, bribing guards, buying phones, and keeping the drug trade alive inside the facility. Orders moved through handwritten notes, phone messages, and even through attorneys paid to act as messengers. In 2018, Operation Dirty Thirds exposed the entire system. The FBI seized hundreds of calls, ledgers, and green light lists. In one recorded conversation, Fox discussed a deal with La Familia Michoacana, a cartel in Mexico, trading drug supply access for prison protection. Federal agents called it a pact between 2 worlds of violence. According to the indictment, Fox didn't just collect money. He ordered assaults, kidnappings, and purges, enforcing loyalty through fear. In a 2025 plea agreement, he admitted to placing at least 1 person on the green light list, and confirmed that the Mexican Mafia maintained control through murder, extortion, and intimidation. Prosecutors said he turned a correctional facility into a tax office. Jose Landa Rodriguez was convicted and is awaiting deportation to Mexico. But the true danger wasn't his sentence, it was the structure he left behind. The shot callers still collect the thirds. The green light lists are still updated, and the name Fox is still spoken in hushed tones. In the world of La Ame, power doesn't lie in knives or guns. It lies in the ability to make an entire prison go silent when you speak. Number 2. Ronald D. Yando, Aryan Brotherhood. In 2015, under the blazing yard of New Folsom Prison, inmate Hugo Pinell was fatally attacked. The prison went into lockdown, and federal agents began tracing the chain of orders that, according to court records, led back to the isolation cell of Ronald D. Yandel. Yandel was identified as one of the 3 members of the Commission, the top governing council of the Aryan Brotherhood in California, one of the most violent white supremacist groups in the state's prison system. In the Aryan Brotherhood, discipline wasn't maintained with paperwork. It was enforced with deadlines. A member who failed to retaliate, didn't pay their share of drug profits, or was caught with dirty paperwork, meaning suspected cooperation with authorities, could be placed on the green light list. Orders flowed through 3 levels: the commission, then shot callers, and finally soldiers, men ready to act without question. A contraband phone was the control panel. A small folded note, a kite, was the death warrant. Once a name appeared, their fate was sealed. Prosecutors described Yandel as the architect of a blood-disciplined chain, a man who ruled through fear in a racially divided system. Cases in the indictment included former allies James Mickey, Paul Diaz, and Kenneth Johnson, men punished for breaking the Brotherhood's code. Yandel didn't need a knife or a visible hand in violence. He had a network, and the silence of those who knew defiance meant death. During the investigation, the FBI uncovered proof that Yandel directed heroin and meth distribution between multiple prisons using disguised phone calls and coded messages. Profits were divided. Leadership took the top share, the rest funded bribes and kept the operation alive. One agent summarized, "He ran it like a military, except every order ended with a body." The 2024 trial lasted 9 weeks, exposing the Brotherhood's structure as Yandel's personal command system. On April 30th, the jury convicted him of murder in aid of racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, and drug trafficking. In December, the judge imposed 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. In the courtroom, Yandel said nothing, no apology, no reaction. The judge stated, "He turned a prison into a place of execution and used other men's lives to enforce his order." Even after sentencing, investigators say the network he built still casts a shadow. The shot callers still operate, and the whispered threats still circulate. 2 life sentences can't erase a code written in fear and blood. In the Aryan Brotherhood, power isn't gained through momentary violence. It's maintained through constant fear, day after day. Number 1. Eduardo Tablas Ravelo, Barrio Azteca. Some prison gangs are born behind walls. Barrio Azteca was born to cross them. And at the center of that line between El Paso and Ciudad Juarez stood one name, Eduardo Tablas Ravelo, the man who turned violence into a common language between 2 worlds. According to the Department of Justice, Ravelo wasn't a cartel boss in the traditional sense. He was the man who managed its darkest work. Under the protection of the Juarez cartel, he led Barrio Azteca, an organization that operated on both sides of the border, a street enforcer unit outside, and a prison network inside the Texas correctional system. When the cartel needed someone to disappear, Ravelo was the one they called. The structure he built had no office, no accountants, only ranks. At the top were captains like Tablas, followed by lieutenants, sergeants, and soldiers, men who lived off the quota, the mandatory tax on every drug transaction. Each week, thousands of dollars flowed back into prisons where Barrio Azteca leaders were serving time. That money bought drugs, paid lawyers, and supported the families of members who had died for the cause. In Ravelo's world, everything had a price, even human life. On March 13, 2010, in Ciudad Juarez, 3 people were fatally shot after leaving a private party. Among them was Leslie Enriquez, a U.S. consulate employee, along with Arthur Radelfs and Jorge Salcido. According to federal indictments, Ravelo was the man who gave the order. It wasn't just an attack, it was a declaration that the line between cartel and government no longer existed. 1 year later, 35 Barrio Azteca members were indicted on R1CO, murder, money laundering, and drug conspiracy charges. 10 of them received life sentences. Ravelo escaped capture and, in 2009, was placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list. For nearly 9 years, he vanished into the forests of Michoacán, protected by the same cartel he had once served. Then, in June 2018, Mexican authorities raided a house in Uruapan. Ravelo didn't resist. He simply said, "I knew you would come." In February 2025, Mexico extradited him to the United States to face charges in El Paso, murder in aid of racketeering and conspiracy to commit murder related to the consulate killings. If convicted, he faces a potential life sentence. Prosecutors described Ravelo as the embodiment of borderless violence, a man who existed between 2 legal systems but belonged to neither. He didn't need to hold a gun. A missed quota payment or a whisper of betrayal was enough to set off bloodshed. Today, Ravelo sits in a federal cell awaiting trial, while his old network still operates in Juarez. Barrio Azteca hasn't fallen, it has simply found new voices to issue the orders. And along the border where his empire once thrived, bullets still cross the line as if the war never ended.